Yeah, we say the way. Woo crew going live, in five. In a time where you walk outside, you got your mask like your name, Mike Myers. Ever met a gang that's lit like mine? You got 10, got Graham, they all part of the fam. We got Fran, got Tess, and calling them in. Professor Ross, who started the plan. Got Lauren and Sajin, yeah, they heading the team. Got Kate and Kelsey, ain't nothing to tell me. Marcel and Joe got it hot like Nelly. Saya make the group go higher. Karina, we need it, she'll get it done when it's required. And I'm the one who's supplying all the fire. Woo crew, name a group who fly. Woo crew going live, in five. In the time where you walk outside, you got your mask like your name, Mike Myers. Ever met a gang that's lit like mine? Woo crew going live, in five. In the time when you walk outside, you got your mask like your name, Mike Myers. Ever met a gang that's lit like ours? Gone.
Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Live with the Woo Crew. In today's episode, we will be interviewing Paul Willis, a Boston native and Holy Cross alum, in his journey in artistic expression through hip hop.
Would you say it's a fair assessment to say like you use your rap as a tool to express social identities?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My family's Jamaican, and what's like really wild is I just took a DNA test and had this whole conversation with my mom because there was no father's name on my birth certificate. So for growing up, I didn't know anything, right? There were no stories, there was no nothing. I was born in 87, so it's the height of the crack cocaine era. My mom struggled with like alcohol and drug addiction for decades of her life. So I just like chalked it up to like mom was struggling with addiction during that time. She may not know, or she may know, may not remember, or may not want to tell me, but either way, like I may not ever know until literally like 3 days ago when I got my results back. And it came back with like, you could see the Jamaican side of my family, right? My mom's side, and then it was 50% Ethiopian, which like blew my mind. So my dad is Ethiopian, which is crazy. And apparently like living in Boston, it's a whole other story. But for me, for the longest time, all of my music kind of reflected around like, this is my family story. This is where I come from. Here's why I rap about social issues and these things that are important to me. It's because my grandmother raised me to believe that education is one of the most important things that you'll ever get, right? And that knowledge is power. Your knowledge of self is the most important thing. Once you have that knowledge, that's something that no one can take away from you. And then, when you go to college, you get a job, whatever, give back to the community because there are always going to be people who are less fortunate. So with those values that have been instilled in me from when I was younger, growing up and then discovering what it meant to be a man, be a Black man here in this society, and then to kind of do this thing where I'm learning about my family's history as I'm getting older and certain stories are starting to come out more and more. I think that this last project's probably like revealed the most about my personal story and my family history because of just all the information I've been able to gain in the past couple of years. So yeah, it's been a real exploration of just my own identity and how that's transformed and changed as I've gotten more information and more stories. But a lot of like what I know about even my own culture has come from, music and media, TV, and then some family stories, but I wasn't getting a ton. So everything I knew about Jamaicans like really came from just like what a lot of those stereotypical things are. We work really hard, we run fast. I'm not a fast runner at all, but we value education, and we're prideful people. A very conscious community that's tight and connected. And then there's also this like underbelly, right? That's like slightly dangerous, but that's something that exists everywhere, right? And learning how to navigate your environment and your culture, and picking up all of the positive traits and attributes, and then leaving the stuff that might be a little bit older and outdated behind was really important to me.
Okay. What impacts have you seen that hip hop has had on the youth community? I guess like near you or whether in
Yeah,
Boston or Sacramento.
yeah. It's hip hop is like one of the most transformative tools for change that I've ever seen. And I think it's because no matter where you are, um, that power that comes with self-expression, no matter what your like form is, you don't have to be an MC if you're a graffiti artist or a break dancer, or if you're a producer or a DJ. That part doesn't actually matter, but the ability to create and express has been something that when you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, you want people to show up as their full selves and to embrace their authenticity and power. And hip hop allows people to do that in all of its forms. So, in the communities and different spaces that I've been um, in Sacramento, I'll start here. It was like music was my business card, right? So as I'm building branding and awareness for this education nonprofit, I'm performing at open mics. I'm like telling my story, and people are like, "So you work in schools? What do you do? How do we get involved? Like, do I just buy a CD, or like, what do some of your students need?" Like we hear the story, so it's a way to kind of bring people together in that sense. And out here, I met a number of different communities that were using hip hop and music and arts to really impact young people in a really powerful way. So I met folks from the Soul Collective, which I'm now on the executive board. But I started going there as an open mic, and it's a community center for art, culture, and activism. So in Sacramento, it's like the cultural hub. It's like the spot for all of these like Black, brown, queer, indigenous community. All of this stuff exists here in this one place. So that was really special. And they offer community programming every single day of the week, from like free or low cost, yoga classes to indigenous music jam sessions. And Danza Azteca uses the space as a rehearsal space. They do concerts, in youth programming here in the city. They have an internship program where young people can earn studio time to either create like visual art or music and getting in the studio and that kind of thing. So when I saw how people were using, and I'm sorry if you hear the leaf blower that's outside right now, I apologize. Um, but when you see how an organization has been committed to transforming and impacting its community through the arts first, it really kind of helped change my perception of just what was possible. There's another group out here called the Auburn Hip Hop Congress, and they're one chapter of a national organization that organizes hip hop artists who are into hip hop and education and using the arts as more than a tool to just get famous. And they were doing work in the juvenile hall. And that was my first opportunity to kind of get into a juvenile hall and to work with young people who are incarcerated and to show them that there's life beyond what they know, right? They're growing up in situations and circumstances very similar to my own. And their families are dealing with, drug and alcohol abuse, trauma, all of these different, adverse childhood experiences. So seeing the kind of impact that hip hop can have in their lives, when they get out, they know, oh, there's this worldwide community that I'm now tapped into, that if I need something, I can just ask. Like if I need an opportunity, or if I need a camera, or if I need some studio time, anything that's going to keep me off the streets and out of the drug game and that kind of thing, like they have this support system. Back home, while I was kind of meeting people and seeing the stuff here, when I see the work of Oompa and Kat Morris with the Boston Arts Music and Soul Festival, when I see Amanda Shea, when I see Brandy Blaze, and just really powerful Black women like that, Ja D, with the If You Can Feel It, You Can Speak It open mic, the way that they organize their events and center marginalized communities first was a super powerful thing. They're not only getting grants and working on really cool projects like albums and album release shows and that kind of thing. But when you think about the Boston hip hop scene being run by like Black women, Black and queer women, like it's powerful, right? Because that doesn't happen. If you listen to just the mainstream, you know what I mean, dialogue around who's important in hip hop, those voices don't rise to the top. But in Boston, that's like the thing right now. And of course, you have like your Millies and there's a few other folks, who come from that like older generation in that era of like underground, grimy, gritty, you know what I mean, lyrical folks. And that's always been cool. But to see this kind of rebirth and this energy around these voices has been something that I think transforms the way that people view the art form and the culture. So, whatever I can do to be a part of that, that's really what my like hip hop is fine art campaign is about. Elevating hip hop performances into fine art spaces. We've seen some of that before, where like Kanye had like the ballerinas in the Runaway video, or Jay-Z was an exhibit at the MoMA and he performed Picasso Baby to like each individual person in line, right? Like there have been moments where hip hop has been embraced in that sense, but it's not ever seen as on equal footing, right? And representation in those spaces still doesn't exist. So that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm pushing now is hip hop as a tool for building greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. But those are some of the ways that I've seen it be really impactful in the community.
For my question, I would like to touch upon the whole hip hop is fine art subject. I know you had a film Wonderland, which was also an album. So I kind of wanted to ask you, who were your inspirations into going to a, hip hop and visual art combined route?
Yeah. Um, you know, there there are a few kind of like hip hop movies, but not quite the same. Like, you know, you think about like Spike Lee as like a hip hop style movie maker, right? Some people think that he's this amazing visionary, but a lot of his influences like come from not just like film, but from black spaces and particularly hip hop spaces. You think about all of the like hood DVDs, like from like smack battles to the streets is watching and stuff like that. Stuff where people were always kind of putting together the visuals to express what their music was about. Nowadays, I think it's more common to see a visual album, like the Beyonce Lemonade album, and pieces like that. I think about Guava Island by Childish Gambino with Rihanna, and that's like a movie, but there's a whole soundtrack to that kind of filled out what that movie was like. So I think that there are a number of different artists who kind of explored this thing. For me, when I was thinking about it, it came up when I was applying for funding through the Black Artist Fund here in Sacramento. And I wanted to have my band perform the music, which sounds like easy enough, but it's not, because it's like at a minimum like an 8-piece, maybe a 7-piece band, not including myself. And it just gets really expensive to like pay for everything out of pocket. So in order to have like a professional videographer and professional sound and all that kind of stuff, like it would have been, I think, something like $4,000 for like renting out the venue, feeding everybody, paying everybody. It would have been something crazy like that. What it turned into was a conversation with the Black Artist Fund, because they weren't giving away any awards of that size, but they were connected to an additional source of funding. And we decided to kind of expand and grow the project from just live music performances to bringing in dancers, bringing in poets, and having this community conversation about home and really a changing Sacramento and gentrification, especially during this time of COVID-19 and the pandemic, right? We all know what insecurities kind of look like and feel like, but oftentimes the people who are going through it the most don't get their voices heard and elevated. So while I was telling my story about how I saw Jamaica Plain become gentrified, over a span of like 10 to 15 years, and me going back home for trips and for visits and like seeing whole buildings change and seeing my neighbors now, they don't own their homes, and just the entire kind of feel and vibe of the neighborhood shifting. Sacramento's going through that right now, so I wanted to capture those stories and capture those voices and put them front and center. So we, created the piece that we created, so people got a chance to hear my story through the music, but then hear the community story from the people themselves. So that's really, the inspiration behind it and how it came together. There's a bunch of artists who do similar things, but I think that for this particular film, the conversation around using hip hop as a tool for diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's pretty apparent in these spaces, and I'm excited to like share the film and to kind of bring it to different spaces. Where I have a meeting tomorrow with a professor from Harvard who wants to screen the film, which is super dope. We're doing a joint college event with the University of San Francisco and Sacramento State University. So it's pretty dope. Would love to bring it to Holy Cross. Let's figure that out with y'all. Let's do it. But the idea is to kind of bring it out to different spaces, colleges, universities, community spaces, hip hop spaces. I want the youth to, be in the center of some of these conversations where they might feel like they're powerless watching some of these changes happen. So I want to show them that their art, the music that they create, they have a voice, and there's a way to use that through this whole process. So that's some of the inspiration, and that's really where I'd like to see it go.
Okay, and for our next question, what strategies have you employed during the pandemic to sort of like get your music out?
Ooh, yeah, that's a great question. It's hard because I was literally in San Francisco when the NBA canceled their games and the rest of the season. I had a show that night, and I remember kind of grabbing a slice of pizza, seeing the announcement on the TV, and talking to my partner at the time, saying like, "Are they gonna cancel the show? Like when we walk back in, did we drive down here for nothing?" And the show went on, but then the very next day, like the rest of the shows that I was booked for got canceled. So it was hard. For the first 3 weeks of the pandemic, I didn't know what to do. I just like sat on my couch, kind of like the rest of the world. We didn't know how big it was until we started hearing the reports about how quickly it was spreading and in how many countries and what certain countries were doing early on in the process. So we just didn't know like what was going to happen and what was going on. At the time, we were working with the Sacramento Bee. They're kind of like the Boston Globe. And we had just started this like community to newsroom pipeline no less than like 2 months before like the pandemic hit, like late February, early March. Then like we had just started in January. And it was an opportunity to help elevate marginalized voices in the local paper. And we got some grant money from Facebook, and we were able to incentivize, those communities to write for the newspaper, tell their stories in a way that a journalist going into those communities and trying to write about those communities, right, from an outsider's perspective, like could never do. So we were just getting that off the ground, and I started writing a race and equity series for the Bee, and it was I was going to cover stuff in the arts and the business community and stuff like that. When the protests started happening, because there was like a period of like 2 weeks there, like where it was like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. It was like so many like incidents, and then everything kind of blew up. The paper hit me up, and they told me, they're like, we like what you're writing and what you're talking about, but we're struggling with like figuring out how do we cover this stuff with an equitable lens. We understand that 85% of our stories, they did a source audit, so that's where these numbers are coming from. 85% of their stories, the subjects of the stories and the sources who were interviewed for their stories were white people, and the majority of that, more than 2/3 of that, were white men who were being sourced into the papers at the time. And they wanted to change those numbers, but they weren't quite too sure how, and how to tap into this network and community that they didn't have a great relationship with. So they hired me to do consulting work. And this is like a part of the strategy for kind of making it through the pandemic as an artist, is like shifting and pivoting, right? Because my work and my music is about this, these social justice issues, diversity and inclusion issues. So now that I'm getting hired as a consultant to do this work too. And for 3 months, I worked with the local paper to, I saw the news before it came out, basically. And anytime there were stories that didn't have Black people in it, I then like recommended people. And we, if stories were only focused on like our downtown and midtown core, which is like our central city here in Sacramento, then it's like, how do you reach out to the Black and brown communities that are kind of at the edges of town? So that was a huge part of my work over the summer. And then I started, applying for grants and started receiving some of that funding in the fall, and was able to finish my album during the fall, finish the film in the fall and winter times. But that was a huge part of it kind of early on, was adjusting to this new era and this new time. I was facilitating for a leadership program called the Nehemiah Emerging Leaders Program, which helps to elevate Black and brown professionals who are kind of mid-career, looking to be in like executive or board seats, throughout the region. And I do like leadership and professional development training with that program. So there were a number of different ways where it, if it wasn't the music and the art, then it was writing with the paper, it's training with the leadership program, it's taking on this side project that's like a 1-day contract or retreat for an organization. So it's things like that that kind of helped me get through the pandemic. And what I found is that it just like reinforces the work that I do as an artist. And it introduces my art to people who never would have even considered or listened to it before. I had a contracting gig with folks from this company called Tesco, and they're an engineering company. They make like the physical like waterways and electrical systems for the city, right? And they have this older kind of management team and a bunch of kind of young engineers who are builders. And I had to help like translate some of this like new language around diversity and inclusion, and share strategies about how to, effectively lead and manage with some of this new language. It was a really cool opportunity. They had no clue that I was a hip hop artist before I walked in the room, right? And by the time that I leave, as I'm sharing my experiences about building community and engaging with diverse audiences and that kind of thing, and I also share that I do music, and that's part of, kind of seeing people as their whole selves. We can't just box people in or assume that we're all one way because we show up in an academic space or in a professional setting in a particular kind of way. People are multi-layered and complex. So we should suspend our judgment and just stay curious about who people are, and continuously just investigate to make sure that people are not approaching others with a certain level of bias. So it's been interesting work in seeing some of the different pieces that overlap. But again, like the music has been a business card for me, so that's been a really cool thing. But I think during the pandemic, the people who I've engaged with on this consulting side have then discovered that I also do music and are into that too. So it's a cool two-way street there.
And now a word from our state rep, Daniel Donahue, about an important nonprofit organization located in Worcester. We hope you will support in solidarity with the Woo Crew.
Hi, I'm Daniel Donahue, Massachusetts State Representative for the 16th Worcester District. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you a bit more about Abby's House, a nonprofit organization that values women from diverse backgrounds and experiences in my hometown of Worcester, Mass. The mission of Abby's House is to provide shelter and affordable housing, as well as advocacy and support services to homeless, battered, and low-income women with or without children. This is an important organization in our community, values hospitality, diversity and inclusion, compassion and respect, women's self-determination, and collective effort. Holy Cross was the first class to help support the women of Abby's House by providing volunteers to staff the shelter dating back to 1976. And Holy Cross students and alumni continue to partner with Abby's House by providing monetary, in-kind, and volunteer support. I hope you'll consider joining us by making a donation to Abby's House in honor of their 45th anniversary. Your donations will help to keep in operation the 79 units of supportive housing and 9 overnight shelter beds of Abby's House. Additionally, your donation will contribute to the wonderful programs of Abby's House, such as providing each woman with an advocate who helps her identify realistic goals and provides her with the tools she needs to achieve these goals. If you are able and willing to make a gift to this amazing nonprofit, please click the link accompanying this video. If you would like to learn more about Abby's House, including opportunities for volunteering, please visit them at abbyshouse.org. Thank you.
Thank you for your time listening to our state representative talk about this great opportunity to support the Worcester community. And now back to the Woo Crew for more excitement.
If you don't mind me asking, I feel like it's time we like dive into Wonderland, like the art itself. So one of my favorite songs on Wonderland is Common Square, just because I grew up around there. I was at the library all the time. So I have to ask you, what's your favorite song off Wonderland and why?
That's hard. I love them all. You know, Codman Square, I think is up there. I'm a huge fan of Ruggles because of the musicality that's there. I think Kendall MIT is probably like one of the most like lyrical in terms of like hip hop and flows and patterns and things that are there. I really like to perform the title track, Wonderland, because I get to like live out all of my like Brooklyn like MC swagger dreams, you know what I mean? With the flow that's very much like old school Jay-Z and Benny the Butcher now, you know what I mean? So those are all amazing songs. I think like another song I really like off the album is Dudley. The beat switch in there is crazy. And having the singers kind of accent different parts of the verses, I think is super dope. So if you're asking me to pick one right now, I'll just say Dudley. Though I love them all.
I guess my next question would be, what's the significance of like, I guess, public transportation in your work? What you can kind of see, like you choose specific places in Boston and then kind of like base those off your songs.
Yeah, those are all places where I grew up and had meaningful experiences at each of those places. You know, my middle school was across the street from Ruggles. You know, I grew up in Jackson Square. Heath Street was 2 blocks over. You know, Codman Square, my auntie's restaurant is over there. A Taste of Eden. You know, Martell, you might know the little Jamaican spot that's over there. That's my auntie's place, Auntie Hope.
I've been there before.
Yeah. She's been there for like 30 years too. So each of those, you know, places kind of represents something different. I think the 2 exceptions to that are Maverick and Wonderland, because I had actually never been to Wonderland until the days that we were doing the album photography. I'd actually never been. So that's a really like cool fact about the album. And Wonderland has always kind of represented um, this idea of like what's beyond what you know, right? I never thought I'd leave my neighborhood. I never thought I'd leave Boston. Um, and Wonderland is like even beyond airport, right? So you could literally like leave Boston, you could fly out of the state and never see what's at Wonderland. Um, you know, and then there's like the obviously like the metaphor and the double entendre with like Alice in Wonderland, where she was that whole movie, she dreamed, she dreamt all of that stuff up. And she was allowed to do that, right? Whereas kids from like my neighborhood, you know, weren't always allowed to do that. So it's that idea of giving yourself permission and the freedom to dream and to create the reality and life of your choosing. That's what that really represents. And then Maverick, again, like I've not really spent a ton of time in East Boston, but or at you know Maverick, but the idea of fatherhood and like me not knowing mine, and my buddy Chinua, who's the school board member I was telling you about, you know, he knows his grandfather and his dad, and he's a dad to 5 kids, you know, so he's able to talk about fatherhood in a completely different way. And I asked him if he, you know, didn't mind sharing some lessons that either he learned from his dad or that he passes on to his kids. And while I talked about what it was like to not have one, he kind of flipped the script in the narrative there. So, and the idea of the Maverick as like the standalone, you know what I mean, kind of hero figure from movies or TV. You know, the one guy's kind of like always on the road, traveling, doing his thing. You know, I just thought that that was a good kind of fit for the topic and the theme of that song. But every other, you know, my mom lives in Kendall Square, you know, and we lived in a couple different places right in that neighborhood. So we, you know, got into fights over there. Not me and my mom, but just like me and my brothers and sisters and like kids from the neighborhood. We saw how MIT really bought up the projects, you know, and some of the low income communities over there to build either new buildings or housing for students and stuff like that. So, you know, every place has a meaning that's like that.
So my next question is like within your work, how do you relate hip hop to social justice? And do you believe that all rappers should have like a conscious element within their work?
Yeah. Hip hop has a declaration of peace. I think people don't know that, but it got like acknowledged at the United Nations in 2001. And it was signed by like 300 hip hop delegates at the time. And because of that, I think that, you know, it's important to recognize that hip hop has always been about social justice and giving a voice to the voiceless and empowering people to share their stories from their perspective. So I think that that's the biggest social justice element, you know, is that you give somebody a microphone who has been dying to speak, then you're gonna get it. You know, like you're gonna get it. Same thing if you give them a spray can or put them on a DJ, right? Like they're gonna express themselves in such a powerful way that it can for real like shift the energy in the room. I've written songs that have made people cry, and I didn't intend to. It's just like when the message kind of reaches people, it impacts people in such a powerful way. So you know, I think it's always been tied and connected. And I agree with Nina Simone, you know, it's the artist's responsibility to reflect the times. I agree with that. You know, I think that, you know, while there's a time and a place for like party and turn up music and the whole nine, like we can't be like all conscious 100% of the time and all party 100%. You know what I mean? There's got to be better balance. And before the commercialization of hip hop, there was better balance. You had party music, and then you had songs like The Message. You know, so you had Queen Latifah doing "Ladies First," and that was being played on the radio. You know, there's so many other examples that I can give, but like it's that same idea that hip hop and social justice has always been tied. And when you realize that it's a continuation of the voices from our ancestors, like hip hop came from funk and jazz and blues, and you keep going back. It's beyond Negro spirituals all the way to West Africa and the griots, you know, who were storytellers who would go village to village to share stories and traditions and songs and poetry. And they would do that orally. You know, they weren't just like carrying a whole bunch of books around. You know, they would share these stories in the same way that you would see cats in a cipher on a street corner somewhere, right? Like sharing these stories, sharing these thoughts and ideas. So it's always been part of this like legacy and tradition, and it's always been tied to liberation. You know, when you think about the freedom that comes with the ability to create something from nothing, the ability for the art to transform people's lives and impact people in those ways, and then the art's ability to transform your sense of self and identity and your ability to see the world in such a different way, right? Like all of that stuff is connected to social justice.
Okay, and I guess our last question would be, what advice would you give us as first-year students at Holy Cross, or just youth interested in the hip hop scene?
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna tell you like my elders told me: dream big, don't limit yourselves, collaborate so you can multiply your efforts together, and don't limit yourselves to just the campus. You know, I think that one of the things that really opened my eyes to the whole holistic experience was there were things that I could get from the community that I could never get from campus. I had to be open to that though, and I had to go out and seek that stuff. There's no one on campus going to point you anywhere else except for like, this is what we have here, and that's all we can do for you. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to be helpful in those other spaces. So I'd say just like, you know, if there are things that don't affirm you on campus, you know, you can build with other students to create those types of supports, but also know that you can find it in other spaces. I highly encourage you to do so, because predominantly white institutions and many other institutions of power, whether they're like corporate workspaces and even nonprofits, you know, they have their own hierarchies and systems that really weren't designed with us in mind. So don't box yourselves in, go get what you need, be assertive. And if they're not willing to help on an institutional level, that's fine. Reach out to the community and get what you need. And the community will always take care of you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It was nice meeting you.
It was so great to meet y'all. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, this is so dope.
I hope we can touch with you. You dropped a couple gems on this.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah. So however I can be helpful, and all of my like hip hop connections are like your hip hop connections too. So whatever y'all need, just holler.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
that's it. Thank you for doing this interview. We'll be in touch. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. Peace.